An arrow comes out of the grass at 300 yards and takes a Russian knight through the eye. Nobody sees who fired it. The horsemen who did are already gone, riding away, twisting backward in the saddle to shoot as they go. That is how this war opens, and it does not stop for 9 days. 9 days of 80,000 men chasing an enemy that will not turn and fight. Horses dying under their riders. A river crossing packed so tight with drowned animals that men walk over on their backs. And on the 9th day, the running stops, and fewer than 1 in 10 of those 80,000 ever sees home again. Welcome back to the channel, where we look for what history got right and why it remembers it wrong. May 31st, 1223. The Kalka River on the open steppe of what is now eastern Ukraine. Europe's first look at the Mongols, and the most expensive lesson any group of princes has ever been taught. Here is the first thing to unlearn. Retreat is not weakness. In the right hands, it is a weapon, and this one took 9 days to load. The men who loaded it were Jebe and Subutai, and they were not invading anything. 20,000 horse archers. No siege engines, no supply line, no orders to take a single city. What they had was permission to go and look. They were the far end of a campaign that had already torn the Khwarezmian Empire apart. And instead of going home, the two generals asked Genghis Khan if they could keep riding. While they waited on the answer, they crossed the Caucasus, fought into Georgia, and killed its king. By the time they reached the Black Sea steppe, these men had ridden most of the way around the known world and had not lost yet. And keep one thing in the back of your mind, because it is what people still remember about Kalka 8 centuries later. When this was over, 3 Russian grand princes were executed without 1 drop of their blood touching the ground. No blade, no wound. We will get to exactly how at the end. But it starts with an old man riding into a Russian court with camels, slaves, and a warning nobody wanted. The Rus did not stumble into this war. They were invited into it twice, and they said yes both times. The first invitation came from a man who had spent his whole life as their enemy. Khotan, Khan of the Western Cumans, had already been beaten twice by the Mongols and had nothing left to bargain with except fear. He rode to the court of Mstislav the Bold, Prince of Galicia, who happened to be married to his daughter, and he did not come empty-handed. Horses, camels, buffalo, slave women. He handed them out to every Russian prince who would listen, and his argument was very short. The Mongols have taken our land today. Tomorrow they will come and take yours. Understand who was saying that. The Cumans and the Rus had been burning each other's villages for 100 years. Russian mothers used Cuman raiders to frighten children. For Khotan to ride north and beg his oldest enemy for help tells you more about what he had seen on that steppe than any battle account could. And it worked. The princes gathered at Kiev, and that assembly is remarkable in itself because these men could barely stand each other. Mstislav Romanovich of Kiev, senior in rank and nominal commander. Mstislav the Bold of Galicia, the best soldier among them and the least interested in taking orders. Daniel Romanovich of Volhynia, still a young man who would live to become a king. Principalities that had been at each other's throats for 2 generations sat in one room and agreed to march. Then came the second invitation, and this one they should have refused. 6 Mongol envoys with 2 interpreters rode into the Russian camp. The message was simple. The Mongols had no quarrel with the Rus. They were hunting Cumans, nothing more. Stay out of it. The Russians looked at these short, bow-legged men from nowhere, decided they were spies, and Mstislav Romanovich ordered all 6 killed. The interpreters were allowed to leave. Here is what the Rus did not know. To a Mongol, killing an envoy was not an insult. It was a capital crime against the state, and it carried exactly 1 sentence. 4 years earlier, the ruler of Khwarezm had executed Mongol ambassadors, and Genghis Khan wiped his empire off the map for it. The Rus had just repeated the mistake that destroyed a civilization. A second embassy arrived soon after. It did not negotiate. It declared war and rode away unharmed. The Mongols now had a war they could justify against an enemy that had just shown them exactly how it thinks. The Rus brought 80,000 men to the steppe. What they did not bring was a commander. No prince was ever appointed commander-in-chief, which meant that every prince was free to do whatever he thought best. And every prince did. The army moved in 3 separate bodies on 3 separate lines. Galicia and Volhynia went down the river. Kiev and Chernigov went up it. The men of Kursk came in from the front. On a map, it looks like a wide encircling maneuver. On the ground, it was 3 armies with no shared plan, no shared timetable, and no way to reach each other quickly. And this is the sentence that explains the entire battle. The Mongols operated as a single will. The Rus operated as a committee. Jeba and Subutai began pulling east, and as they went, they left something behind. A rear guard of 1,000 riders under an officer named Hamabek. Mstislav the Bold reached the river opposite them, saw a small, isolated force, and crossed under heavy arrow fire. The Rus had the numbers, and it was not close. Hamabek's 1,000 were killed to the last man. Now look at what that victory actually cost. Not one Russian prince died. Not one army was damaged. What was destroyed was something far more valuable, which was doubt. From that afternoon on, every Russian commander on that steppe was working from the same conclusion. The Mongols run because they are afraid. Everything after this follows from that one sentence. So they chased. 9 days east, deeper and deeper into open grassland, farther from their supply boats and their river crossings. The faster princes pulled ahead of the slower ones. The gaps between the 3 columns stretched to miles. Scouts stopped finding friendly units. And the Mongols? They could do this almost forever. Every Mongol trooper rode with several spare horses on a lead rein and changed mounts on the move, so the animal underneath him was never worn out. The men chasing them had 1 horse each, and it was getting thinner every day. That is what 9 days of retreat was for. It was not an escape. It was a sorting machine. On the 9th day, the running stopped, and the Rus discovered they had chased their enemy onto ground the enemy had picked. May 31st, 1223, on the banks of the Kalka. The Mongols turned and came at them from the front and both flanks at the same moment, which is not something a fleeing army can do. It requires a plan made days in advance. And the first blow did not fall on the Russian knights. It fell on the Cuman cavalry riding out in front, the most exhausted and most demoralized men in the whole coalition. These were people who had already been beaten twice by these same Mongols. They knew what was coming. They broke almost immediately, and here is where the battle is decided. They did not scatter sideways into open steppe. They turned and ran back the way they had come, straight into the Russian ranks advancing behind them. Thousands of terrified horsemen tearing through their own allies. The Rus was shattered by their own side before a single Mongol reached them, and the Mongols poured through the gap the Cumans had opened. If that sounds familiar, it should. 200 years later at Agincourt, French cavalry would break and stampede backward into French infantry, and it would end the same way. Same mechanism, different century. And because the Rus had marched in 3 columns, they arrived at the fighting in 3 separate waves. The Mongols never had to fight 80,000 men. They fought 20,000, 3 times over, and beat each group before the next one understood what was happening. Mstislav the Bold, the best soldier the Rus had, got out. He rode hard for the Dnieper, crossed it, and then destroyed every boat on the bank behind him so nothing could follow. It saved his life. It also cut the escape route of every man still trapped on the wrong side of that river. That left Mstislav Romanovich of Kiev on a hill, ringing his position with wagons. His men crouched behind shields and cart beds. And it held. For 3 days, the Mongol archers could not break it. So they stopped shooting and used something that worked better. a promise. Surrender, and you and your men will be allowed to walk away. He took it, and the moment the Russians laid down their weapons, the Mongols killed them. Now here is the promise from the beginning of this video. 3 Russian grand princes executed without one drop of their blood touching the ground. Mongol custom held that royal blood spilled on the earth was a curse, so a captured prince could not simply be beheaded. It had to be done another way. The 3 princes, Mstislav Romanovich of Kiev among them, were bound hand and foot and laid flat on the ground. Heavy wooden boards were placed over them, and then the Mongol commanders, Subutai and Jebe, and their senior officers, climbed on top of that platform and held their victory feast on it. They ate and drank above the men underneath until the weight and the hours had crushed the life out of them. Historians argue about how literally to take this. Similar stories appear after other Mongol victories, and it may have hardened into legend. But it turns up in more than one independent chronicle, and nobody at the time found it hard to believe. As for the army, fewer than 1 man in 10 made it home. Around a dozen princes died. 6 of them were cut down in the open, run to ground during the flight back toward the Dnieper. And then comes the part that should genuinely unsettle you. The Mongols did not invade. They turned around, raided the Volga on the way, and rode back to Genghis Khan. This was never a conquest. It was a reconnaissance, and Kalka was not a battle to them. It was data. So what actually happened here? This was not 2 armies fighting. It was 2 kinds of organization meeting for the first time. One side brought 80,000 men and 10 different wills. The other brought 20,000 and 1. Numbers have never once beaten unity. They only make the defeat more expensive. 14 years later, in 1237, Batu Khan came back with the full army, and he found the Rus exactly as divided as his uncles had left them. Nothing had been learned. The Mongols had not come to conquer them, they had come to read them. And what they read, they wrote down and carried home.